And that's just a little part of that particular aria. The aria does go on. It's about, as Vera says, it's about that long. Let's talk about. I talked about the 30 performances. Let me read just a bit to you of what New York had to say about this piece. First of all, Herbert's favorite critic, who had been with him all his career and had always said wonderful, wonderful things, said, well, it's not a masterpiece. Although The Girl of the Golden West would be much better and more effective without Puccini's music, Natoma would be completely lost without Herbert's. The libretto of Joseph Redding should go down in operatic history as one of the most futile, fatuous, halting, impotent, inane, and puerile ever written. This is coming out of New York. The music exhibited bizarre and fascinating effects. Herbert's use of instrumental color is striking, his thorough musicianship unmistakable, even though some persons may have been disappointed by the lack of fluent melody. That was one man's opinion. Another man said, in choosing the worst libretto ever set to music, the composer has disappointed his admirers and has written an operetta which has no real excuse for being. Obviously, hurtful things, not just bad things, but hurtful things. There's some really unbelievable ones. Let's see. Is this the really good one? Where's the really, this is the really good one. This is coming out of the Boston Evening, okay? This is a Boston paper talking. The comparative failure of the first performance in Philadelphia, in spite of an able cast and thorough preparation, an antiquated book written in stilted speech and silly verse that contains neither operatic drama nor operatic characters. The mediocrity and the dull commonplace of Mr. Herbert's music, except where it approximates operetta, is undramatic and untheatrical quality. The vivid pictorial side of the opera and it is left with Miss Garden. They did love Miss Garden. Natoma is utterly mediocre opera. It's not interesting musically, it seldom touches the imagination, and it never once stirs answering emotions. Joseph Redding was devastating. We've talked often about how Herbert's librettos have always been trashed. This one was trashed particularly, and every single person who wrote trashed it, and really trashed it like you just heard. The man had never written an opera before. He didn't write one again for a long time, and was very, very, very devastated by the whole thing. Herbert was deeply hurt by the way his opera was received. He never got over it. They were saying, it said that in the last month or so of his life, 1924, he was finally carrying around Act 1 because he finally admitted that Act 1 needed cutting. He, to a certain extent, he was defending Redding, but he was also very hurt that because this was his masterpiece. He didn't write anything that is anywhere comparable to this in the operetta world. Yes, he wrote wonderful operetta, but this was truly a masterpiece. And when you hear the whole thing, you say, this is amazing. And the fact that it went on the shelf for 100 years and was not heard by a single living person in its entirety, written the way Herbert wrote it. 57-piece orchestra. Actually, he probably had, when he did it, 60 people in the orchestra. He had 100 people in the chorus. And he had, of course, the best opera singers in the world. And as I have said over and over and over again, when Herbert writes to what he has. And so therefore, this is a very difficult opera because he wrote for the best. I'm trying to, let me see if there's anything else. Meantime, out in the hinterlands, Kansas, With Natoma to lead on Victor Herbert's American opera was a pioneer success. The hinterlands loved it, Kansas loved it, Texas loved it. Let's see if there's any other. But then, of course, Boston came back with another headline that said, "A dull text set to mediocre music." Now, how you could say mediocre music to what you just heard? And this is just a little bit of it. One thinks, well, maybe the rest of the opera is terrible. No, that's not the case at all. I think what we'll do now is, it's about quarter after. You may have questions. I have just touched on the surface. I could teach a course, a 4-week, 6-week course in just the opera wars. The things that happened in the opera wars were absolutely amazing. And notice how the Met dealt with it in the long run. They threw money. $1.25 million. And they would not be challenged again until 1943, when the New York City Opera opened. And they've never really been knocked off the pedestal. Oscar tried. He did his best. If he had been a better businessman, he would have succeeded. The Met would have gone down if Oscar hadn't gone broke. And on that note, thank you very much for listening. Well, thank you for coming, and if you have any questions, ask away. Oh, I forgot to show you my favorite picture.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Mary Garden was wandering through Missouri, and the Indians thanked her. And of course, there was a picture opportunity. That's my favorite picture. Anyway, anybody have any questions at all? Yes.
Does the Met building in Philadelphia, is that still standing today?
Yes, it is, and they're talking about renovating it. A church. In the last 25 years, a church leased it. I have seen pictures. If you go Googling the Philadelphia Opera House, and don't call it the Met, call it the Philadelphia Opera House. No, I think you'll find it easier. There's a whole video that takes you through, because there's been talk of renovating that one quite a bit. 4,000 seats, though. I'm sure it won't be renovated that far. Anybody any other questions? Yes, sir.
Well, it's my first time to hear genuine American opera. I'm an opera musicologist, if I may say. It sounded to me, with the beautiful voices and performances, and I appreciate that a lot, but it sounded to me like a composer who's trying hard to write an opera in a Wagnerian style, yet keeping faithful to American tradition. If this is correct, then what I would believe that the best impact for such a work is really tied the American future music development to Europe in a way such that it's not a different new definition of opera rises at that time, later on maybe. Am I correct in saying so?
Well, Victor Herbert stood with, I like to say he stood with 1 foot in Vienna and 1 foot in New York. And his heart was in Ireland. So he was educated, not only was he educated in Germany, in Stuttgart, but he spent a significant time playing all the Austrian operettas and playing in the orchestras. And he played in one of the royal orchestras for a solid year. So he knew his European roots. And it was one reason why he had a hard time moving into what he wanted to be American music. He wanted American music to be new, but you can't take the Europe out of the boy, right? So yes, you heard a lot, but there are echoes of, he's been compared, and I'm not, my head's so full of the Toma right now, he's been compared to, in the same line with Offenbach, with Richard Strauss, several of the big European operetta composers. He's been linked with them. So, definitely, that's there. Now, if you want a true American opera that nobody talks about, and the first one, because it was ahead of this one, and that's Tremonisha.
Oh.
Tremonisha, written by Scott Joplin. If you haven't heard it, and don't go listening to the version that they did at Lincoln Center, get yourself a copy of the Paragon Ragtime Orchestra, who played it the way it was meant to be played. It's a salon orchestra, if you're familiar what that is. One each of the strings, one flute, one clarinet, two cornets, a trombone, and drums. Listen to that opera because it is written by a black man about black people. Slavery's in there. It's folk oriented. It's an amazing opera, and no one talks about it. And that is, in fact, it's not a grand opera because it wasn't written for an orchestra, and it was written for a salon orchestra. That's the way he did it. Scott Joplin's Tremonisha, the first true American opera. Anybody else? We still got some minutes? If not, we can just say hail, farewell, and talk to the singers over here. And thank you all so much for coming.